Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, August 8th, 2025, and today we are talking about if you can or should pull onions early, the myth of the green thumb, and it's Feedback Friday. So let's do it. All right, happy and healthy Friday to you all. I hope everyone is doing well, headed into your weekends, harvesting, all that good stuff. As I said yesterday, I got some of those beds prepped that are, ready to be prepped, but my seeds have not yet come in. So those beds, unfortunately, are just going to sit there for another day. That's on me, though, for changing my mind mid-season to try and up our offerings a little bit more in the fall. Feels good, though, that I've come to some sort of rhythm with this show, enough to finally have the capacity to even think about increasing what we grow. Farming and doing this show at the same time was for sure tough for a minute. And by a minute, I mean, what has it been, like almost 10 months? But I think we found our groove. And then soccer coaching season just hit, so we shall see how that groove holds up. But anyway, it is Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about compost and microplastics at Nick Zivs. That's fun to say. Wrote, quote, "This summer has been so brutal in southern Ontario, either 95 degrees Fahrenheit plus weather with the humidex, or now it's comfortable, but Toronto has the third worst air quality in the world due to forest fires. Yay for brutal growing seasons. I used to get compost from our city as they did giveaways. After last year, I'll never do it again. I had done it 2 years prior. I found large chunks of broken glass, shredded plastic bags, bits of plastic, etc. You really have to be diligent about your compost sources. Best case, make your own. I've just expanded my compost production on our property at the sacrifice of some square feet of growing space," end quote. So sorry about the fires there. The smoke has even drifted down here to Kentucky several times, but I'm sure it's nothing like it is up there for you all. Also, what you described is one of the many complications with municipal compost, that they are taking in basically everything and not really scrutinizing it or filtering it out so much. It's a bit of a literal mixed bag sometimes. I mean, genuinely bags in there sometimes. Guillaume, whose question it was, wrote, quote, "Thanks, Jesse, for tackling my question and for your perfect French pronunciation." Oh, thanks, Guillaume. "I definitely agree with microplastic contamination of soils will be the next big ag controversy, and this time around, we organic growers will be regarded as the main offenders, I'm afraid. I instinctively gravitated towards the deep compost mulch system partly for that reason, but I'm always taken aback when comparing practices with fellow growers that chose the more common woven plastic way. To hear their concerns regarding the residual plastic bits that are usually contained in the green waste compost we have access to here in France, it feels obvious to me that covering the entirety of your growing space with plastic will produce the worst level of contamination, but others having the opposite intuition. I wish we had more scientific data to settle the issue. Thank you for all the hard work you put in for the community," end quote. Thanks, Guillaume. I would love to have all that research too. But I think it is also safe to say that using a bunch of plastic covering will absolutely result in plastic pollution in one way or another. Microplastics in the garden and or in the landfills, the oceans, and eventually, undeniably now, in ourselves, our bodies. And if we don't dramatically, as a culture, alter our plastic usage, we are in for trouble. You have plastic in your body right now, for instance, guaranteed. And the quantities of that will only grow as the amount of plastic in the world just continues to break down into smaller and smaller pieces. As I often bemoan, there is no separating the environment from your health. You are what you eat, as the saying goes. You are what your plant eats, as that saying goes. And they are what their microbes eat. And so, increasingly, we are all just plastic. I will say, doing this show and all the research has certainly opened my eyes to microplastics in a way that I had not really fully considered, in terms of their ubiquity before. So these concerns are much more top of mind for me, especially as I just see the research is kind of undeniable at this point. And unrelated, like Guillaume said, a couple people have also commented on my French pronunciations. And although, sure, je fais des efforts, that's nice to hear, but there's also actually a somewhat agricultural story there. But I'll save that for next week, because who doesn't love a good story time? Anyway, on Tuesday, we discussed mushrooms, and I like this edition from @illaflamme. 9952, who wrote, quote, "I've grown oyster mushrooms on the corn husks and stalks and cobs from my garden. I've grown them on Amazon boxes. I've grown them on straw. I've grown them on dried plant stems. They're amazing. You can grow them on nearly anything," end quote. Indeed, oysters are really amazing in that way. They aren't just some of the fastest mushrooms to get into production. They are also among the least picky in terms of the substrate that you can use to grow them on. Now, they will also bioaccumulate some heavy metals and chemicals, so things like cardboard may be something I might generally avoid avoid, but could also be a good food source in some long-lasting catastrophe as well, using whatever spent carbon is around to grow a pretty solid protein source. On Wednesday, I talked about priming spinach seed, and at Rachel Mazar, 7374 wrote, quote, "I find your information about priming the seeds interesting. If you do it with beets, I bet it works with chard too." End quote. It does work with chard. And indeed, if done right, it will work with almost any seed. You have to think of priming like what happens in the wild when a seed hits the ground. It's getting wet and dry and stuff all winter. And then when the conditions are right, mainly like the temperature and the level of soil that it's in, the sunlight, all that stuff, it germinates. Seeds you use, unless marked otherwise, have never gone through that cycle. They are harvested dry and kept dry, but in the wild, they need every advantage that they can get. So priming them basically just gets the seeds on the point of germination, and then when the temperatures are right, i.e. they're seeded into a tray, boom, they germinate. Then on Thursday, we talked about AI and environmentalism. People are very defensive of AI, which is both surprising and not surprising. At Alec Livens 8769 wrote, quote, "Can we please get a reality check on energy and water usage of AI? Let's compare other commonly used services. Take a hot shower, that's 6,000 prompts from ChatGPT. A single sheet of paper, 60 prompts. Cup of coffee, 4,500 prompts. A single almond, 130 prompts. A pair of jeans, over 200,000 prompts. Eat a hamburger recently, that's 500,000 prompts. One airline flight, over 800,000 prompts. Average ocean voyage for a freight ship, 125 million prompts." If you've done any of these things recently, please stop complaining about AI. A lot of us find it very, very useful, and I'm sick of this environmental angle, end quote. Now, my point has nothing to do with the fact that there aren't already things that utilize water out in the world, some of which we need, like clothing, cleanliness, and food. It's that we shouldn't add more things that waste energy and water that we don't need, like AI, because things like ChatGPT alone, with upwards of 2.5 billion daily prompts according to Axios, uses the sum of all of that much water listed there 20 times over every single day. So you can find AI useful without using whataboutisms like this to defend it. With fairness to the people who use this brand of argument, because I do appreciate thoughtful criticism, I implore you to consider the helpfulness in contrast with what AI requires to operate, to care about copyright infringements, for instance, the water, the carbon, the energy, the jobs that it will cost, including content creation one day, all of that, or defend it by just being honest and saying you don't really care much about those things. It's faster and more effective than using unrelated examples of waste that we are already contending with to justify AI's use. On the content creation front, in fact, we are within a few years, I would guess, of if I'm being generous there, of bespoke content where someone could just say, I would like a Farmer Jesse style video on carrot production in southern Quebec on clay soils with an emphasis on the best varieties, planting times, harvesting dates, and I don't know, maybe maximize the dad jokes. Neither I nor any other farmer who contributed to the information therein would receive anything for it. So that is the world being cheered on here. I definitely do feel for people for whom that is a reality right now. Sadly, several people said they feel like they have to use AI to stay afloat or keep their jobs. This is why the tide needs to change on our tolerance for this technology now significantly, because those jobs where it's used now are the types of jobs and businesses that we are effectively, for some of you gleefully, replacing. And banks aren't going anywhere, electric bills, grocery bills, the utopia people envision, it's just a fantasy. The reality is many people will be out of work, many younger people will be less skilled, and a lot more energy and water will be used in the process to do that to them. So anyway, lots of fun, thoughtful discourse in the comments there and throughout the week as usual, more than I can ever get to. So feel free to read through and have fun there. Great stuff as always. Up next, we will take a quick break. And when we come back, onions versus weeds. Versus onions, sort of. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. We know it's peak season, you're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Andy Novak at Mother Farm, who asks, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I have some bulb onions that I didn't keep up on weeding, and I'm worried they won't size up well in the weeks leading up to harvest. Can I pull the small ones and sell them as green onion bunches to salvage some value? Thanks," end quote. Okay, so I did, just so you know, answer this whenever it came in so as not to leave Andy hanging. But let's talk about this idea a bit of pulling onions out of bunches or out of beds to help other onions size up, because this can, in some ways, be not just a rescue strategy, but a way to, in fact, get a bonus crop in some instances. First, digging onions out of weeds is the worst, so I feel you there. Like I mentioned earlier this year, I had a small section that ended up weedy after all the rain that we got, and I didn't really have time to get to it. So the onions sized up okay, but they were still a pain to harvest, and I'm sure I lost both yield and, well, onions in that section. Now, weeds will certainly reduce yield, but it doesn't depend a bit on the weed and the stage of the onion when the weed kind of pokes through. For instance, if the onion started the bulbing process already before the weeds really started to take over, it's possible you could still get a decent yield, and it may be worth waiting or just trying to pull some of the weeds. Now, with certain weeds, that wouldn't be possible because you will be pulling up the onions at the same time with all the root mass, but that could be an option later rather than pulling the onions early. However, yes, it is an option to pull the onions early and bunch them with some of the greens on and sell them as fresh onions. I tend to use the term fresh onions rather than green onions because I use the term green onions to refer to what most people call scallions. But each area and farmer can use the terms that they think serve them best. In fact, it was a strategy of ours when we were doing farmers markets to pull onions early that we could tell we're not going to size up significantly because they were in a cluster of onions or were just smaller when they were planted. And then we would bunch those together in 3s or 4s and sell those bunches with the greens trimmed but still on. We sold them at one bunch for $3 or two bunches for $5. So you were almost getting like $1 an onion. And that would free up some space with other onions and give us an early product out of those beds. We didn't quite sell enough that way to justify an entire bed specifically dedicated to those sort of small bunching onions. But I could see getting to the point where you could produce significant quantities of onions that way and make it relatively profitable. And like I said, each bunch selling for $2.50 or $3. So for a 250 square foot bed, that's roughly $1,000 or more depending on the spacing. So if you did or do have to pull them early and you're clever about the marketing, you can actually bring in almost more revenue that way in some instances, because with cured onions, it's harder to sell them at close to $1 a piece in many markets, and you had to wait longer to get them out. So they were in the bed longer, taking up your growing space. One challenge, though, is cleaning these onions, which can take a lifetime and reduce the profitability. So I would recommend cleaning off some of the skin in the field and finishing them in under the sprayer at the wash pack shed to be the most efficient. I have long thought there's a place for sort of an air compressor that doesn't use oil to effectively blow the skins off. So you're not like just sitting there individually peeling the outer layer of the onion off, which makes them more presentable and make them sell better. In fact, I had not talked about this in a couple of years, but just yesterday, our friends at Sage Hill Ranch Gardens tagged No-Till Growers on Instagram with a post using a leaf blower to clean the onions up a bit. And I love that. That's great. That could be a really cool option for just doing a lot of onions really fast. Anyway, I hope that's helpful for you all and your garden planning, and for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere getting ready to start rocking and rolling on those gardens down there and your onions. Let me know any thoughts you have on this and all the things. When we come back, why there is no such thing as a green thumb, just a green dumb. That's terrible. That doesn't work at all. Anyway, be right back.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
All right, so I've expressed my dislike before for the term green thumb or the idea of a green thumb, someone who just has a natural knack for gardening. But I think it's actually helpful to understand why some people seem naturally fitted to gardening or farming more than other people. Because although I don't believe there's an innate ability just to grow food, there are certain examples of people for whom the success seems almost effortless, and it's annoying. But there is something really specific going on with people who have a knack for gardening and or farming that deserves some fleshing out to make sense of, so you're not feeling like a bit of a failure. Because you're not. It may not, at least entirely, be your fault or be quality you lack. First, people who seem inherently adroit at farming and or gardening are often just really detail-oriented. They listen to the directions and heed the advice of successful gardeners and farmers in a way that not everyone does or can. I can say to a million people, for instance, how to properly set up a garden step by step, how to evaluate your context and all those things. And the reality is that only a handful of them will actually do it exactly the way I or some other professional grower recommends. The green thumbs are often those who are just following the directions and are willing to appreciate and digest the nuances like contextual or regional considerations, like the differences in mulch materials, that sort of stuff. The quote unquote green thumbs are also people who just keep it simple. They are not trying a bunch of weird stuff in the garden like I do, but just doing things by the book and keeping their trials small and low risk. Also, there is often an element of luck to green thumbism. For instance, sometimes they just have great soil or great compost available to them, great drainage, and two people could try the same thing, but they just happen to have the better circumstances and it just works out. Then you add a little bit of the personality stuff, detail-oriented, good listener and follower of directions, etc., and the results are seemingly effortless, bountiful gardens, even though it's a lot more work than it looks like. So what's the lesson here? I believe the lesson is that everyone has access to green thumbism. You just really have to keep it simple, follow the directions, and not get too ahead of yourself. Really take your time to investigate your context, time to, look at your soil conditions, your climate, all of that stuff. There is no rush here. Rushing can often lead to less progress, not more. What is the military thing? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That. Follow that guidance. Take your time, do every little piece correctly. This is especially true if you're running a business. The people who succeed the most in running farm businesses are good at following the directions of starting a business. Pretty plain and simple. They are not overly emotional about it. Rather, they are pragmatic and thoughtful and pay attention to the details and listen to the numbers. Certainly, some people will have a natural predilection for pragmatism. I do not myself pretend to be one of these people, but now that you know the secret of green thumbs, there is no reason you can't cultivate those skills as well. Anyway, let's leave this Friday at that and move on with our weekends. Great stuff as always this week from you all in the comments section and in the videos. Really love seeing your all's farms and gardens and operations and videos. Everyone have a great weekend. Don't forget No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to just help us out. Lend us a hand. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over there at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of August, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Kyle Richardville, Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Bill King, Chris Yates, Ian at Grindstone Farms, and Doug Van Allen. A Doug. And we have a Douglas story. May or may not be a coincidence. I can't say. But what I can say is that I truly am honored every time I get to read one or any of these names that you all just like support this work. It is so cool to me. And I promise we're trying to just keep making cool content and putting more out. So thank you. Anyway, as you will recall, Douglas, our 11-year-old, has stumbled upon a wild mystery deep underground behind the creek where he liked to play, but he was found out kind of sneaking down the stairwell by some mysterious adults, and when he tried to run away, he scraped his knees and his elbow, so they took him to the office to patch his bleeding and clean him up a little bit. But when he walked into the room where they do their work, he saw him. There, larger than life, but completely fast asleep, was a giant man who could only be described as Jack Frost. No relation, just so that's clear. From what Douglas could tell, the adults were talking to each other about how they occasionally have to open the cave to allow Jack Frost to, some fresh air while he sleeps through the summer, naturally. But this time, it just so happened that Jack Frost sneezed, which who knew, right? Now, the adults here seemed like they were in a bit of a pickle. Then the adults, patched Douglas up and they gave him some water. And the next thing he knew, Douglas was back by his creek, rubbing his sore knees, kind of confused, trying to figure out where he had got the Band-Aids. But being 11, he just carried on playing, as he always did, by the creek. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.